The reactor kept humming because one pair of hands never let go. Behind a warped containment gate, the heat had already burned through every rescue plan the station could invent. Outside, engineers counted down the last safe margins while an alien guardian uncovered a truth her own order had buried for centuries. Saving one human might preserve an entire civilization, but only at a cost that could never be undone. Welcome to Galactic Contact. This is the story of a frontier station where survival depended not on perfect plans, but on the choices people made after every plan had failed. The collision warning reached Threshold Bastion before the docking clamps finished securing the incoming freighter. Across the command deck, calm blue route markers disappeared beneath a wave of amber alerts. A civilian shuttle had drifted into the emergency approach lane, with its port engine venting superheated plasma. 3 cargo containers spun away from the impact, widening toward occupied docking corridors. 12 seconds since relay loss, an operations officer reported. Civilian traffic hasn't responded. Lyra Vale studied the traffic pattern instead of the damaged shuttle. Layered spectral models unfolded across her visor. Optical tracking suggested one outcome. Gravitational analysis suggested another. Both projections converged on a single conclusion. If the station waited, the debris field would arrive before new instructions. Seal Corridor 7, Lyra said. Open Dock 9. A logistics supervisor glanced up from the console. Dock 9 weakens the defensive perimeter. It clears civilians from the impact corridor. The hesitation lasted only a heartbeat. The station obeyed. Massive blast doors redirected thousands of people before most of them realized their evacuation route had changed. Captain Ethan Caldwell ducked beneath a descending security barrier just before it struck the deck. The damaged shuttle sent uneven vibrations through the station's frame. They traveled beneath his boots, carrying the distant strain of overstressed metal somewhere beyond the bulkheads. Emergency assignments flooded his wrist display. Too few rescue teams. Too many evacuation routes. Commander Thane Orris caught up beside him. The defense line needs every available squad. Ethan kept moving toward the civilian junction. So do the people trapped behind it. They're outside the designated shelter path. There's still people. The maintenance intersection ahead had become a bottleneck. An automated service carrier sat frozen after losing navigation guidance. Parents struggled to drag luggage around it, while emergency stretchers searched for space that no longer existed. Ethan climbed onto the disabled carrier. Left side keeps moving. If you're carrying heavy bags, pass them forward. If your hands are free, take someone's child for 30 seconds. The crowd began flowing again. A medic hurried past with portable oxygen cylinders. Ethan lifted another cylinder from a maintenance rack and placed it into her hands. Dock 9. If station control stays ahead of this. She disappeared into the moving crowd. On the command deck, Dock 9's internal cameras confirmed the first evacuation groups changing direction. Lyra shifted her attention outside the station. The crippled shuttle clipped an automated cargo rail. Fragments scattered across the approach lane. Her visor separated each piece by thermal signature, density, and projected momentum. Most would pass harmlessly into open space. One would not. Captain Caldwell. His image appeared beside overlapping flight projections. You've left your assigned staging point. I found a better use for it. The debris reaches your position in 41 seconds. I won't still be here. His biometric stream appeared in the corner of her display. Elevated heart rate. Accelerated breathing. Steady fine motor control. The order's behavioral model flagged the combination automatically. Observed precision exceeded predicted tolerance under equivalent physiological stress. Lyra left the notation active. The damaged shuttle slammed into Dock 9 hard enough to spray molten metal across the magnetic cradle. Emergency crews rushed forward. Passengers poured through the pressure gate. One elderly maintenance engineer remained outside, trapped behind a distorted service hatch only a few yards from safety. The lock cycle's closing, someone shouted. Ethan ran toward the hatch instead of the doorway. He studied the warped frame for a single moment, slid a rescue bar into the narrow opening, and shifted his footing until the leverage matched the bend in the metal. The hatch gave way with a harsh scrape. Another worker pulled the engineer through. Less than 3 seconds later, the blast doors sealed. Inside the command deck, Lyra replayed the security recording. Protocol predicted that Captain Caldwell should have entered shelter immediately after opening the escape route. Instead, he confirmed every civilian had cleared the corridor before stepping away himself. She archived the sequence for operational review. The outcome was easy to measure. The decision was not. It continued to resist the assumptions built into the Order's predictive models. When casualty reports stabilized and the station settled into a strained working rhythm, Lyra opened an encrypted channel addressed to High Arbiter Kaler. The report remained concise. Operational deviations, civilian survival, resource expenditure, human command behavior. She paused before transmitting the final assessment. Subject demonstrates repeated prioritization of individual lives over strategic optimization. Assessment incomplete. Further observation recommended. High Arbiter Kaler's acknowledgement arrived while repair crews were still replacing scorched docking panels around Dock 9. The message contained no praise. Observation authority expanded. Independent reporting required. Operational interference prohibited unless Order jurisdiction demanded it. Lyra closed the secure channel and turned back to the station's growing workload. The collision had left more than visible damage. Docking schedules overlapped. Cargo inventories no longer matched their assigned locations. Hundreds of civilians remained inside temporary shelters because 2 habitation rings still awaited structural certification. Threshold Bastion had resumed operations. It had not regained stability. A new distress signal interrupted logistics planning less than an hour later. An industrial maintenance platform beyond the construction perimeter had suffered a coolant manifold rupture. Internal pressure remained stable for the moment, but rotating scaffold assemblies prevented automatic docking. 23 workers remained trapped inside compartments that would gradually lose environmental control. Order simulations recommended delaying deployment until structural confidence improved. The projected risk to rescue crews decreased. The trapped workers simply ran out of time. Lyra already knew who would reject the recommendation. She found Ethan inside Hangar 12 supervising the loading of a compact rescue shuttle. Replacement coolant lines rested beside trauma kits and portable atmosphere regulators. A maintenance chief secured the final cargo restraints before stepping away from the ramp. "Our escort package isn't ready," Lyra said. Ethan tightened the locking collar on his pressure suit. "The platform won't wait. Structural certainty remains below Order standards. It'll still be below them an hour from now." Lyra projected the latest engineering model between them. Stress concentrations pulsed through the rotating framework. The support ring could separate. It could. You accept that probability. I accept the people already living inside it. The discussion ended there. The numbers remained unchanged. So did the workers. Commander Thane Orris approached, carrying revised deployment assignments. "We've stripped patrol coverage from 2 sectors." Ethan scanned the updated roster. "Keep the medical corridors protected. That leaves us short elsewhere. It keeps patients alive." Thane nodded once, updated the assignments, and headed toward the launch crew. The rescue shuttle departed under reduced escort. Lyra's interceptor settled into formation several hundred yards above Ethan's flight path. The damaged maintenance platform rotated slowly against open space. Each revolution carried different sections through alternating sunlight and shadow. Escaping coolant condensed into glittering crystalline threads before invisible electromagnetic leakage bent them into irregular curves. Lyra watched the motion through multispectral overlays. The drifting ice no longer matched the station's predictive model. Localized equipment damage had altered particle movement around the platform. The deviation looked minor. It was enough to invalidate several automated docking solutions. "Automatic grapples will miss," Lyra transmitted. "I expected that." Ethan matched the platform's rotation manually. Magnetic clamps engaged only after 3 careful corrections. The airlock aligned. Barely. Inside the platform, Ethan stepped onto metal decking that vibrated with an uneven rhythm transmitted through failing coolant pumps. Every few seconds the resonance shifted beneath his boots, forcing him to adjust before the next oscillation arrived. His visor highlighted expanding temperature gradients inside neighboring compartments. A maintenance supervisor pointed toward a younger technician pinned beneath collapsed conduit supports. No explanation was necessary. Ethan examined the twisted framework before touching it. Frozen coolant had expanded inside a cable race. locking the conduit under load. Forcing it upward immediately would collapse the adjacent brace. He secured a compact thermal cartridge against the frozen joint and waited as frost retreated across the alloy. Only then did he lift. The conduit rose just enough. 2 workers pulled the trapped technician free. The entire rescue lasted less than 30 seconds. Outside the platform, Lyra monitored the operation through external sensors. Ethan's heart rate climbed. Muscle fatigue increased. His manual precision barely changed. Another behavioral variance appeared against the order's predictive model. The system highlighted it automatically. Lyra left the annotation untouched. Environmental reserves deteriorated faster than expected. The platform's emergency controller entered critical status. Ethan removed the auxiliary power module from his own suit and connected it directly to the failing regulator. His remaining reserve dropped immediately. The station recalculated survival margins. 1 probability declined. 23 others improved. You've reduced your extraction buffer, Lyra observed. Ethan organized the workers into pairs, placing the strongest beside those already weakened by the cold. My buffer isn't the emergency anymore. The workers adjusted without hesitation. Those who could still walk supported those who could not. Heavy equipment passed from exhausted hands to steadier ones. By the time the final compartment emptied, Ethan's environmental reserve had entered its last operational band. He boarded the shuttle only after confirming the platform contained no remaining life signatures. Threshold Bastion received the rescue team beneath a gray maintenance canopy rather than a ceremonial arrival deck. Repair crews immediately dismantled the overheated shuttle engines for inspection. Equipment losses exceeded every original projection. Civilian survival exceeded them all. Later, Lyra completed her second report. Resource expenditure, operational deviations, verified outcomes. She added 1 final observation before encrypting the file. Observed reliability under escalating operational pressure exceeds current order predictive models. The transmission departed through secure channels. Seconds later, a priority notification spread across the Bastion's command network. High Arbiter Kaler had entered the station's operational jurisdiction in person. Kaler entered Threshold Bastion without ceremony. His shuttle docked through a restricted maintenance berth while civilian traffic continued through neighboring corridors, unaware that the highest authority within the order had arrived. There were no formal greetings. Access permissions simply shifted. Engineering terminals that had accepted requests an hour earlier now rejected them. Maintenance crews noticed first. Repair schedules stretched. Replacement parts remained inside secured storage. Structural inspections continued, but every recommendation now required another layer of approval before work could begin. The delay stayed invisible until the station faced its next routine problem. Habitation Ring 4 registered a growing harmonic oscillation inside one of its primary support trusses. Engineers isolated the affected section immediately, yet the reinforcement lattice remained locked inside a logistics vault awaiting revised clearance. Authorization finally arrived. The structure did not wait. The unsupported span yielded. The corridor floor twisted along a fractured seam. Emergency shutters sealed the section before atmosphere escaped. 3 residents suffered serious injuries. The casualties could have been worse. The delay had already done enough. Ethan reached the damaged corridor while autonomous lifting frames removed the bent structural member. Instead of watching the fractured beam, he knelt beside a portable resonance scanner resting on the deck. The instrument had recorded the oscillation from the beginning. Its waveform flattened only after the emergency isolation. Too late. Commander Thane Oris folded the casualty report and slipped it into his jacket. We didn't lose anyone. We lost the time that would have prevented this. The authorization came through after the structure made the decision for us. Neither officer raised his voice. Nearby technicians were already measuring replacement geometry with handheld laser grids. Every minute spent assigning blame delayed the repair another minute. They returned to work. Later that cycle, Kaler examined the damaged corridor himself. He paused beside the fractured support instead of the medical evacuation route. A portable resonance monitor still sampled faint vibrations traveling through the deeper sections of the station. Administrative certainty had delayed engineering action. Engineering delay had produced measurable damage. The sequence required no interpretation. He continued toward the command sector. Lyra found Ethan inside Fabrication Bay 3. Portable additive forges were building a temporary replacement brace one layer at a time. Molten alloy flowed through magnetic shaping fields before cooling into a ribbed truss designed to carry partial load rather than permanent service. The air carried the scent of heated ceramic dust instead of scorched insulation. Every fabrication cycle ended with a soft metallic click as cooling restraints released another finished segment. You began manufacturing before permanent authorization. We began preserving the corridor. The approved design differs. Ethan gestured toward 3 engineers adjusting stress calculations above a workbench. The approved design also isn't here. One engineer rotated the structural model several degrees. The temporary brace distributed force unevenly. It wasn't ideal. It was sufficient. Lyra activated a multispectral scan. Microscopic magnetic discontinuities glowed inside the unfinished alloy. Their distribution matched the engineering calculations almost exactly. The projected service life decreases. It only has to survive 36 hours. Lyra verified the estimate. The numbers agreed. The engineering solution wasn't what held her attention. The decision process was. Nobody paused for the highest-ranking voice. Each technician solved the problem supported by the evidence directly in front of them, then passed updated measurements to the next specialist. Competence accumulated first. Authority followed afterward. Lyra stored the observation, not as doctrine, as data. Kaler reviewed the complete incident sequence inside a restricted command room. Initial oscillation. Authorization delay. Temporary reinforcement. Projected long-term stability. Every engineering calculation remained sound. The administrative process had failed to keep pace with reality. He archived the reports for continued review. No disciplinary order followed. That absence carried nearly as much weight as punishment would have. Before ending her shift, Lyra received a sealed memorandum. Operational deviation may preserve lives. Institutional precedent preserves civilizations. Confuse one for the other, and both eventually fail. The authorization belonged to Kaler. She read the message once and closed the file. Outside the viewport, orbital construction drones adjusted replacement hull sections around Dock 9. Their engines burned additional propellant to compensate for the station's altered mass distribution, preventing fresh alignment errors from spreading across the docking network. Threshold Bastion no longer possessed comfortable safety margins. Every correction demanded another. A priority deployment order appeared on Lyra's wrist display. The same assignment reached Ethan at the exact same moment. For the first time since the crisis began, both officers operated under a single command directive. The joint deployment order arrived without explanation. It didn't need one. Cargo Spine 11 had become the station's newest point of failure. Emergency rerouting had pushed more freight through unfinished infrastructure than the original construction schedule had ever intended to support. Threshold Bastion was still paying for earlier decisions. Lyra's interceptor reached the corridor first. Instead of orderly shipping lanes, she found massive coolant containers drifting through a partially completed construction sector where temporary guide rails intersected civilian traffic. Construction drones hovered outside the danger zone. Their collision avoidance systems refused to enter a field where navigation certainty had dropped below operational limits. A translucent engineering model unfolded across her visor. The containers were not the immediate threat. Their combined momentum was. Ethan's shuttle emerged from behind the unfinished truss network moments later. Commander Thane Orris remained aboard, coordinating civilian traffic through short bursts of revised flight paths instead of ordering a full evacuation. The approach lane is saturated, Thane said. If we stop everyone, the backup spreads across 3 docking sectors. Lyra expanded the simulation. If the container group reaches the unfinished conduit, reactor fabrication loses primary distribution. How long to replace it? Ethan asked. Engineering estimates 6 days. Thane looked toward the crowded civilian approach queue beyond the construction lattice. We don't have 6 days. The silence that followed wasn't uncertainty. It was calculation. Lyra separated the simulation into independent vectors. Every solution protected one system while exposing another. The defensive grid, civilian logistics, manufacturing. No configuration avoided measurable loss. The mass has to move, she said. Ethan studied the projected drift before answering. Not all of it. He highlighted only the leading container cluster. If we shift the front section far enough, the rest will miss the conduit on its own. Lyra verified the geometry. He was right. Barely. The required lateral offset exceeds one interceptor's maneuvering authority. So we don't use one. The first maneuver failed. Their synchronized thrust rotated the leading container instead of translating it. The unexpected spin propagated through the tethered cargo chain, sending a second tank drifting toward an unfinished support mast. Construction alarms activated immediately. Magnetic work platforms detached from the framework and withdrew to a safe distance. Lyra cut thrust first, preventing the rotation from accelerating. Ethan matched her reduction almost instantly. The spin slowed. Only then did both crews rebuild the solution. Instead of treating the cargo chain as a single object, they isolated tension inside the connecting braces and recalculated their impulse timing around the assembly's natural flex. The second attempt demanded far greater precision. Thane cleared civilian traffic one vessel at a time, accepting longer arrival delays to keep the approach corridor predictable instead of congested. Commercial pilots received revised vectors. Most adjusted course after checking the calculations themselves. Lyra powered down her interceptor's defensive field. Energy flowed into maneuvering thrusters. Her hull protection narrowed immediately. Microscopic debris struck exposed armor in rapid succession, each impact echoing through the flight frame. Across the cargo formation, Ethan redirected power from non-essential cabin systems into propulsion control. Cockpit temperature climbed steadily. Perspiration blurred the edge of his vision before the ventilation system compensated as far as its remaining power allowed. Impulse in 3 seconds. Thane transmitted after confirming the corridor was clear. Neither pilot answered. Their engines did. The combined thrust entered the cargo chain from opposite directions. For several long seconds, nothing seemed to change. Then the leading containers drifted sideways by inches. The connecting braces flexed. One restraint coupling sheared apart. A coolant tank lurched unexpectedly toward the unfinished conduit. Lyra rolled beneath it, using the last of her lateral control authority to alter its momentum just enough for Ethan to reach the opposite side. His shuttle caught the new vector. The engines protested. Automatic thermal protection reduced output before catastrophic failure. Momentum carried the shuttle toward the skeletal construction framework. Lyra abandoned the final correction to the cargo chain. She redirected every remaining maneuvering reserve toward Ethan's shuttle. The collision between the two craft was deliberate. It was never meant to be gentle. Her damaged stabilizer fractured completely as the impact absorbed enough momentum to push Ethan clear of the unfinished supports. Behind them, the displaced cargo group slipped past the reactor conduit with only the narrowest margin to spare. No secondary collision followed. The construction corridor survived. So did the civilian supply route. Back aboard Threshold Bastion, engineering inspectors walked the entire length of cargo spine 11 before releasing it for restricted operation. Repair estimates multiplied. Replacement parts, already delayed by new authorization procedures, became even harder to schedule. The crisis had been contained. The maintenance debt had grown. Kaler reviewed every sensor record himself. 2 officers from different command traditions had solved the emergency without abandoning their own principles. Neither had persuaded the other through argument. Shared risk had changed more than words could. Before either damaged craft reached its repair berth, a priority alert interrupted every strategic network aboard the station. Deep space monitoring arrays had detected an expanding gravitational anomaly beyond the frontier corridor. Every evacuation doctrine stored inside Threshold Bastion assumed the fold network would remain stable. The incoming telemetry no longer supported that assumption. The first anomaly appeared where nothing seemed to have changed. Outbound traffic continued toward the frontier fold gate. Repair drones circled Ethan's damaged shuttle inside Dock 9. Fabrication crews replaced fractured conduit supports along cargo spine 11. Threshold Bastion looked fully operational. Its navigation network disagreed. A calibration buoy positioned beyond the station transmitted a reference pulse that arrived 43 microseconds late. The delay remained well inside normal operating tolerance. The second buoy reported no delay. The third produced an impossible solution. Its quantum timing matched the first beacon. Its gravitational reference frame matched neither. Lyra expanded the telemetry instead of dismissing it as sensor noise. Independent systems had begun describing different versions of the same location. Emergency analysts assembled beneath the Bastion's operations dome. Civilian physicists compared timing drift. Order navigators examined fold synchronization. Human engineers overlaid structural movement recorded since the Dock 9 collision, the industrial platform rescue, the temporary reinforcement in Habitation Ring 4, and the cargo spine maneuver. Each event remained insignificant on its own. Together, they revealed a pattern no operational model had ever tested. The accumulated redistribution of mass, emergency thrust vectors, and continuous structural compensation had altered the local gravitational field by tiny increments. Every individual change remained below reporting thresholds. Their combined effect did not. A frontier physicist removed the datasets one at a time. The navigation solution stabilized. He restored them. The solution fractured again. No new variable appeared. Only the combined weight of every accepted correction. Fold activation remained on schedule. Kaler ordered verification before authorizing cancellation. The gate itself had never reported a fault. The surrounding mathematics had. Calibration drones launched toward the synchronization boundary. The first crossed safely. Its guidance remained stable. The second entered 38 seconds later after local compensation algorithms updated to the newest reference data. Optical tracking remained normal. Its inertial frame drifted. Electromagnetic positioning diverged in another direction. The onboard processor attempted to reconcile all three. Its maneuvering thrusters fired against conflicting coordinates. The drone tore itself apart under its own corrections. Fragments continued along different predicted paths, depending on which sensor network observed them. The third launch never left its cradle. Inside the command center, updated evacuation models collapsed one after another. Reducing civilian mass delayed failure. Increasing escort craft delayed failure. Redirecting departures shifted failure somewhere else. Every simulation reached the same endpoint. The fold corridor could no longer establish stable synchronization before navigation uncertainty exceeded operational limits. Ethan stood beside the projection table, watching route lines disappear instead of multiply. What changes if traffic stops completely? A logistics specialist replaced transport mass with an empty corridor. The instability remained. Ships had never caused the problem. They had only revealed it. Lyra replayed months of station telemetry against the latest measurements. Dock 9. The industrial platform. Habitation Ring 4. Cargo Spine 11. Every emergency decision had been technically correct with the information available at the time. Each had introduced a minute physical change accepted because it appeared harmless in isolation. No model had evaluated their cumulative interaction with fold synchronization. The evacuation doctrine remained displayed across the central wall long after every projection supporting it had vanished. The display stayed illuminated while analysis teams rebuilt the calculations from the beginning. Civilian researchers, military engineers, order navigators. Each group worked independently. Each arrived at nearly the same synchronization envelope. The conclusion never changed. Threshold Bastion could still reach the fold gate. It could no longer enter it safely. Traffic controllers redirected outbound vessels toward temporary holding orbits. Dock assignments became habitation assignments. Construction barges converted into emergency shelters. Freight schedules dissolved into resource inventories. The station stopped preparing to leave. It began preparing to remain. Outside the observation dome, the fold ring continued its silent orbit. Nothing about its appearance suggested it had become unreachable. Its geometry remained unchanged. The surrounding space no longer did. Kaler closed the final validation report. Additional simulations could reduce uncertainty. They could not restore synchronization. Lyra archived the obsolete evacuation doctrine beside the engineering datasets that had invalidated it. Ethan folded the abandoned departure schedule and placed it beneath the revised resource allocation charts now governing the station. Deep below the command decks, Foundation compensators redirected another fraction of reactor output towards structural stabilization. Life support reserves fell again. Threshold Bastion had crossed an engineering threshold that procedure alone could not reverse. The next decision would begin somewhere outside every plan that had brought the station this far. Threshold bastions settled into a rhythm no one had designed. Construction drones abandoned expansion projects and turned to reinforcing occupied sectors. Docking control reassigned freight berths as temporary housing. Fabrication queues that once produced structural components now alternated between life support hardware and replacement reactor assemblies because neither could wait indefinitely. Every revised priority pushed another farther down the list. Nothing disappeared. It simply waited longer. The archive vault rested beneath the oldest section of the bastion, where construction tolerances belonged to an earlier generation of orbital engineering. Kaler entered alone. The biometric seal accepted his authorization without delay. Heavy containment doors separated along magnetic bearings, revealing rows of crystalline storage lattices suspended inside temperature-controlled chambers. The room contained no ceremonial relics, only operational history. He bypassed recent centuries without slowing. His destination lay inside a compartment marked with an obsolete classification no longer recognized by the current order. Life Cycle Exception Records. The designation had vanished from every active database generations earlier. It remained here because archives preserved history more faithfully than institutions preserved memory. Kaler removed the first crystal. The retrieval interface reconstructed fragmented mission logs, engineering analyses, casualty reports, and tribunal findings from civilizations that had faced failures unlike, yet disturbingly close to, the one unfolding outside. None described miracles. Each exception began with measurable physical constraints. Each conclusion ended with measurable loss. Lyra arrived after receiving a restricted summons carrying Kaler's highest authorization. He offered no introduction. The archive projection expanded between them. The earliest recovered record showed an orbital refuge unable to stabilize a transit corridor after cumulative infrastructure modifications altered its surrounding gravitational topology. A later case documented a planetary evacuation halted because quantum navigation references diverged beyond recoverable limits. Different civilizations, different technologies, different centuries. The engineering mathematics converged. Every investigation isolated the same limitation. Navigation systems could compensate for damaged infrastructure. They could not compensate indefinitely after the reference geometry supporting the transit network itself had changed. Lyra examined the supporting datasets instead of the attached verdicts. Residual gravitational harmonics. Reference frame divergence. Thermal loading inside synchronization arrays. Processing latency as correction models became increasingly unstable. Every equation followed established physics. None suggested a practical reversal. She advanced to the final archive. Its engineering appendix ended abruptly. The biological records continued. One annotation appeared only once. Exceptional restoration authorization. No explanation survived beside it. The associated technical files had been deliberately removed centuries earlier. Only cross-references remained. Kaler enlarged the preservation log surrounding the missing material. The deletion orders originated from the order itself, not from outside censorship. Revision history confirmed that the files had existed long enough to influence institutional policy before disappearing from active doctrine. The record is incomplete, Lyra said. It was made incomplete. The archive itself demonstrated the difference. Elsewhere aboard the Bastion, Ethan worked inside Environmental Control Sector 2. Portable filtration units lined the corridor awaiting installation after carbon reclamation efficiency dropped another fraction of a percent overnight. Engineers moved continuously between pressure regulators, coolant exchangers, and oxygen recovery manifolds. Conversations centered on remaining operating margins. A maintenance supervisor unfolded the latest allocation sheet across an equipment crate. Replacement membranes requested. None available. Secondary pump refurbishment delayed. Power redistribution approved. The calculations balanced. Only because comfort had already been removed from the equation. Ethan examined a damaged circulation impeller resting on the workbench. Hairline fractures spread across its ceramic surface. Repair would restore partial efficiency. Replacement would restore full efficiency. Replacement stock no longer existed. He selected repair. The decision solved today's failure while quietly increasing tomorrow's maintenance burden. No inventory report offered a better option. Station status reports accumulated faster than engineering crews could close them. Agricultural output declined after lighting schedules shifted to conserve reactor reserves. Water recycling efficiency fell as filtration assemblies exceeded their intended service life. Medical logistics postponed non-critical procedures because sterile manufacturing capacity now supported atmospheric systems. Every department optimized its own workload. The station continued to decline as a whole. Lyra left the archive carrying encrypted copies of every surviving technical record. None contained instructions capable of restoring fold synchronization. They contained something less comforting. Evidence that the Bastion's crisis belonged to a class of failures encountered before. Evidence that earlier civilizations had searched beyond ordinary procedure. Evidence that someone had later decided those searches should become difficult to find. She transmitted the recovered engineering datasets to the Bastion's Scientific Council. The biological appendix remained isolated inside restricted storage pending verification. Too much surrounding evidence had already proven reliable to dismiss it without exhaustive review. Kaler remained inside the archive after Lyra departed. The projection continued illuminating empty reference paths where erased files should have appeared. He compared deletion timestamps against institutional reforms adopted during the same era. The chronology aligned too precisely to ignore. Engineering evidence had survived. Its most consequential continuation had not. He sealed the chamber and transferred custodianship of the recovered archive to Lyra under emergency authority. The authorization bypassed ordinary archival hierarchy. It also created a permanent record that the missing history had been formally acknowledged. Outside the vault, reactor output shifted again towards structural stabilization. Life support reserves contracted by another measurable margin. Threshold Bastion had inherited every consequence of its past decisions. Its future now depended on records someone had once chosen to erase. Threshold Bastion entered controlled power rationing on the 31st day after fold synchronization failed. The announcement changed very little. Most departments had already been operating below nominal capacity. Lighting dimmed across residential sectors. Artificial gravity cycled through minor reductions during scheduled maintenance windows. Fabrication priorities narrowed again until only structural reinforcement, atmospheric systems, and critical medical equipment remained in continuous production. The reactor stayed stable. The station around it did not. The next structural warning originated beneath the central energy exchange. It wasn't triggered by an impact or a power surge. It came from accumulated compensation. Emergency reinforcement installed after Dock 9 had altered load distribution. Temporary repairs following the industrial platform rescue had redirected coolant routing. Cargo Spine 11 continued carrying freight through support members never designed for sustained traffic. Each decision had preserved lives. Each temporary solution had remained in place because permanent replacement was no longer possible. Engineering overlays identified the consequence with quiet precision. A reactor coolant transfer manifold had entered harmonic stress beyond its certified operating range. If the manifold fractured, coolant flow would collapse before automatic isolation could complete. The reactor would survive. The station's life support reserve would not. Engineers gathered around the projection table inside reactor control. Every proposal shifted the risk somewhere else. Remote manipulators lacked the dexterity to replace the damaged transfer assembly while coolant remained under pressure. Depressurizing the system required shutting down structural stabilization. The weakened framework could not tolerate the resulting gravitational imbalance. One option remained: a manual replacement inside the active service chamber. Estimated exposure exceeded certified survival limits. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what the numbers required. Ethan studied the maintenance model without speaking. The damaged manifold rested beyond 2 thermal shielding gates. Automated tooling could deliver the replacement components. But once thermal expansion exceeded calibration tolerance, only human hands could align the locking collars. He memorized the sequence: seal, release, rotate, lock, restore flow. There would be no opportunity to improvise. Lyra arrived before the maintenance cycle began. She reviewed every engineering calculation herself. Heat loading, radiation exposure, mechanical tolerance, coolant pressure. The figures remained consistent. No hidden variable appeared. There isn't another configuration, the chief engineer said. Lyra searched again. Different routing, different timing, different sequencing. Every alternative simply moved the failure elsewhere. The reactor demanded one uninterrupted coolant path. Her gaze lingered on the projection a moment longer before she lowered it. Nothing in the surviving archive changed the mathematics. Kaler authorized the operation personally. Order authority offered no technical advantage. The signature acknowledged responsibility for the decision. Operational necessity confirmed. Mission authority delegated. Recovery assets prepared. The authorization closed the discussion. The maintenance chamber accepted Ethan one compartment at a time. Each pressure door sealed before the next opened. A steady mechanical vibration traveled through the surrounding structure, carried by pumps that had run continuously since the fold crisis began. The final compartment shimmered with heat despite the cooling systems operating at maximum capacity. The damaged manifold waited exactly where the engineering model had predicted. Hairline fractures spread across its outer collar. Still intact. Not for much longer. Ethan secured the replacement assembly against the guide rail and followed the sequence exactly as rehearsed. Release. Rotation. Alignment. The first locking collar disengaged. Coolant pressure forced the manifold sideways farther than predicted. Weeks of cumulative thermal expansion had reduced the remaining clearance by less than 3 millimeters. That was enough. The replacement assembly jammed. The coolant path narrowed. Warning indicators across reactor control shifted from amber to red. Outside the chamber, engineers recalculated continuously. Every revised geometry failed. No remote tool could reach the locking surface. Structural stabilization consumed every remaining power margin. Interrupting coolant flow would reduce reactor output below the level required to support the station's reinforced framework. The reactor would shut itself down safely. Threshold Bastion would not remain structurally stable long enough to restart it. Lyra overlaid every recovered archive record against the live engineering data. Nothing in the surviving files altered the outcome. The missing continuation inside the archive became more significant with every passing second. Inside the chamber, Ethan released the damaged alignment arm from the automated tooling. Without it, the replacement assembly lost its mechanical support. Leaving it attached guaranteed the manifold would never seat correctly. He braced one shoulder beneath the replacement housing and absorbed its shifting weight himself. The guide rail aligned. The second locking collar rotated into place. The final seal remained half engaged. His suit reported rapidly increasing thermal load. He kept pushing. Outside, coolant flow stabilized for a moment. Then it faltered again. The chamber pressure held. The manifold did not. The replacement required sustained force that no automated system could provide from outside. Ethan adjusted his footing against the vibrating deck and drove the assembly forward one last time. The locking ring engaged. Coolant surged through the transfer manifold. Reactor output stabilized. Across the station, structural compensators returned to emergency operating margins before the load-bearing framework failed. Life support remained online. Inside the chamber, Ethan stayed beside the manifold. The thermal shielding gate behind him had warped during the pressure surge. Mechanical actuators cycled once. Then again, the gate never moved. Recovery crews reached the outer access corridor within minutes. Engineering scans penetrated only the first containment layer. Beyond it, interference from the active reactor blurred every biological reading into unstable noise. No reliable life signs emerged. No confirmed fatality appeared either. The reactor remained stable. The chamber remained sealed. Any rescue attempt powerful enough to reach Ethan threatened the station he had just saved. Threshold Bastion survived because one decision had held. Its greatest cost had not yet been paid. Rescue operations continued for 9 hours. No one declared the chamber beyond recovery. Engineering teams replaced warped actuator assemblies, redirected maintenance tunnels, and mapped every surviving access route through the reactor shielding. Every approach failed for a different reason. The containment structure had distorted under sustained thermal loading after the manifold locked into place. Removing the damaged shielding from outside transferred stress directly into the stabilized coolant path. Breaking through the reactor wall might save one life, but it would place hundreds of thousands at risk. No new calculation changed that balance. Threshold Bastion remained alive because the chamber remained sealed. Inside the chamber, Ethan stayed where he had fallen. His suit had entered emergency conservation long before external communication failed. Coolant flowed steadily through the manifold he had aligned. The slower rhythm of vibration beneath the deck confirmed that the station still held together. He checked the locking ring one more time. Still secure. The warped shielding gate never responded. Neither did the secondary manual release. He stopped trying. Instead, he secured the replacement assembly with an additional mechanical brace taken from his tool harness. If thermal contraction shifted the manifold during future power fluctuations, the brace would delay the movement long enough for engineers outside to react. It was the last useful component within reach. Nothing else could improve the chamber. Inside the archive vault, Lyra reopened the incomplete record. She ignored the missing conclusions. Her attention settled on everything surrounding them. Engineering appendices, preservation protocols, tribunal timestamps, biological custody logs. One sequence appeared again and again. Whenever catastrophic exposure exceeded biological recovery limits, continuous neural activity, not cellular integrity, determined whether identity could still be transferred before irreversible collapse. The principle was already familiar. Medical preservation systems depended on it. The missing continuation had never introduced new biology. It extended accepted biology into a constitutional process the Order had removed from practical doctrine. Lyra compared the surviving archive fragments with the Order's own constitutional foundation governing a Valkyrie's divine, eternal soul. The transfer had always existed, not as resurrection, as succession. The current bearer could voluntarily surrender the entire conscious substrate carried within the divine, eternal soul to preserve another compatible consciousness whose biological continuity had not yet completely ceased. The exchange allowed no reversal, no duplication, no recovery. One existence continued. The other ended permanently. The missing engineering records no longer mattered. The biological consequence explained why. Kaler read the reconstructed record without speaking. Every surviving regulation surrounding the divine, eternal soul assumed orderly succession within the Order. None prohibited voluntary transfer. None described its use outside institutional continuity. Centuries earlier, someone had erased the practical history. The constitutional mechanism remained because removing it would have rewritten the Order itself. He closed the archive. There will be no second bearer. Lyra steadied the insignia on her uniform before unclasping it. She placed it beside the archive crystal. Then she accepted emergency custody of the recovered record. The containment chamber opened only after engineers completed a narrow service corridor that preserved reactor stability while exposing a single maintenance passage. Recovery teams reached Ethan minutes before irreversible systemic failure. He remained attached to the manifold brace. His heart still beat. His nervous system no longer sustained organized activity. Medical stabilization preserved circulation. It could not restore consciousness. The preservation interval identified in the archive had not yet expired. The physicians confirmed the remaining window. Every available treatment had already reached its limit. They stepped back from the bed. The transfer chamber occupied an unused medical isolation suite. There were no ceremonial symbols, only monitoring equipment, biological support systems, quantum identity recorders already certified for constitutional succession. Kaler authenticated the procedure. Emergency authority replaced tradition. Lyra laid the archive crystal beside the folded insignia. She rested on the adjacent platform while medical staff synchronized both neural monitoring systems. Identity continuity, biological viability, transfer threshold. Every reading remained inside established limits. The chamber required no hidden mechanism. It already contained every component necessary for constitutional succession. It had never been intended for this recipient. Lyra rested one hand against the edge of the platform. She drew one slow breath. Then she initiated the transfer. Her divine eternal soul separated without light or spectacle. The monitors changed instead. One consciousness declined along a continuous curve. The other rose with equal precision. Energy accounting remained balanced. Identity existed once. Then once again. Never twice. Lyra's neurological activity reached zero. No secondary pattern appeared. No residual signal remained available for preservation. Medical staff confirmed permanent termination before disconnecting the system. The constitutional recorder accepted Ethan Caldwell as the sole surviving continuity. It registered no bearer for Lyra Vale. There never would be another. Hours later, Ethan opened his eyes. He remembered aligning the manifold, the warped shielding gate, the pressure against his shoulder. Nothing beyond that point. He tried to sit upright. The attending physician steadied him. Across the room, Lyra's folded insignia rested beside the archive crystal inside a sealed historical case. Kaler entered without an escort. He lifted the insignia and placed it into permanent archival custody. Outside the medical sector, engineering crews returned to reinforcing the station. Traffic controllers continued assigning habitation berths instead of departure windows. Maintenance teams repaired the reactor access corridor that Lyra's decision had preserved. No announcement spread through Threshold Bastion. Its people lived inside the consequence. The station endured because one human refused to abandon it. The human endured because one Valkyrie chose not to remain. Threshold Bastion never reached the fold. Months passed. The station no longer prepared for departure. Orbital foundries surrounded the outer hull where evacuation convoys had once assembled. Cargo vessels arrived carrying raw or instead of passenger manifests. Habitation rings that had been built as temporary shelters slowly became permanent districts linked by reinforced corridors still marked with the scars of emergency construction. The station had survived. Its future had changed. The reactor manifold Ethan secured remained in service behind a transparent maintenance shield. Engineers eventually received replacement components. They installed them everywhere except there. Every inspection confirmed that the original locking collar still carried its load exactly as it had on the day the chamber was sealed. The additional brace Ethan improvised remained fastened beside it. Months of heat had darkened its surface. Nobody polished it. Nobody surrounded it with ceremony. Maintenance crews simply inspected both pieces during every scheduled service before moving on to the next task. Ethan returned to duty after rehabilitation ended. Medical evaluations cleared him for operational command with one permanent restriction. His neural continuity no longer matched baseline human physiology in several measurable patterns left by the constitutional transfer. The changes granted no unusual abilities. They required lifelong observation. He accepted every examination without argument. Whenever new engineering teams rotated through reactor control, Ethan walked the maintenance route with them before assigning anyone to the chamber. He never asked another person to enter a place he had not entered first. Lyra Vale appeared nowhere inside the station's active records. Her service authorization ended at the moment of transfer. Her command privileges expired. Her biometric identity ceased with constitutional finality. The archive reflected exactly what the constitutional process required. One continuity ended. Another continued. Nothing remained that could return. Kaler convened the first public review of the Fold crisis after civilian governance resumed regular procedure. Representatives from engineering, logistics, medical services, navigation, and the Order filled the same chamber where evacuation models had once covered the central wall. The investigation spared no institution. Engineering records documented where technical warnings had stalled inside administrative review. Operational reports showed where emergency improvisation had preserved lives while increasing long-term structural risk. Recovered archive material confirmed that essential historical records had been intentionally removed from practical doctrine generations earlier. Responsibility reached across decades. It could not be assigned to one convenient official. Several senior administrators resigned before disciplinary hearings concluded. Others remained, responsible for dismantling procedures they had once defended. The reforms that followed made no promises of perfect judgment. Approval chains affecting engineering emergencies became shorter. Independent scientific review became mandatory before archival consolidation. Any future removal of technical history required a permanent public record. None of those changes restored what had already been lost. They reduced the chance of repeating it. The recovered archive entered civilian stewardship under joint scientific oversight. The constitutional transfer remained recorded exactly once. Its legal status changed forever. It could never be ordered. It could never become an institutional expectation. It could exist only as the voluntary decision of its current bearer, made with full authority to refuse. No successor received Lyra's place. The Order accepted a vacancy that could not be filled without denying the meaning of the choice that created it. Life aboard Threshold Bastion settled into difficult routines. Children attended classrooms built inside former logistics depots. Hydroponic farms occupied unfinished construction bays once reserved for military expansion. Repair crews continued replacing temporary reinforcements installed during the crisis, discovering each week another compromise that had lasted longer than anyone intended. Progress arrived quietly, one repair at a time. Near the reactor complex, an observation window overlooked the maintenance corridor leading toward the chamber where Ethan had nearly died. The archival case holding Lyra's insignia rested nearby beneath ordinary lighting. No guard stood beside it. Visitors stopped because they chose to. One afternoon, a junior engineer studied the display before turning toward Ethan. "Why is there only an insignia? Why isn't there a portrait?" Ethan looked through the glass toward the repaired manifold. Maintenance crews were already replacing another worn support farther inside the corridor. "They don't need a picture," he said quietly. "They already left us the work." The young engineer followed his gaze. Nobody slowed. Tools continued moving. Measurements continued. The station expanded section by section beyond its original hull, built by people who understood that small corrections could reshape an entire civilization when enough of them accumulated. Far beyond the construction yards, the fold gate continued its silent orbit. Threshold Bastion never crossed it. Humanity endured anyway. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If you had Lyra's choice, would you surrender your own existence to save one life and an entire future? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Galactic Contact for more unforgettable stories.